Hey.
Hey. And also, by the way, Ron is here.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Ron.
I'm the director of the festival. We're
good.
We're gonna start in just about 10 seconds here.
Okay, great.
Good. Are you good, Brian? Awesome. Great. So, thanks for coming, everyone. This is part of a series of casual, informal, spirited talks that we have throughout the festival. We serve food, try and make it a little more casual than a formal panel discussion. We invite different participating artists to come and interface with the audiences. So today we're Skyping in Kevin Nutt, and we have Andrew Dinwiddie, who's here from Brooklyn. And Andrew will be performing Get Mad at Sin. I guess it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday?
That's right, Friday, Saturday night, Sunday afternoon.
Yep, it's a must-see show. You must go see the show. You have no choice. But I'd like to just begin with you maybe introducing Kevin.
Yeah.
And
so this as you probably or may know, that this Chewing the Fat series of I don't think you mentioned the Fusebox Festival, by the way, which is why we're here.
This is part of the Fusebox Festival.
For people who are listening to this, who may have come across it in other ways on the internet. And this is an opportunity for people to talk to the artists, myself, about our process. But I also thought that it would be a great opportunity to talk to someone who I really admire, who is Kevin Nutt, who's on the line here. And Kevin is the host of a show on WFMU, a radio station in New Jersey, and he plays on the show obscure, eccentric, amazing gospel music. And Kevin, you've been doing it for 10 years?
That's right, 10 years.
And what kind of, how would you define the type of gospel music that you play? Gospel music is like saying pop music almost. It's so broad.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess the short answer could be I know it when I hear it, but that doesn't. That's not going to work. It's more specifically. It's probably gospel music, primarily black gospel music that has a Pentecostal holiness influence in the music itself, which has its roots in probably in the early part of the 20th century, 1905 or 1910. There's no recordings of that type of music, of course, but there is in the 1920s, and the Pentecostal holiness, holy roller, there's various names for the style, and the denomination. Musically, the songs were speeded up, the tempo was increased, and there's an emphasis on the 2 and the 4, the beat on the 2 and the 4. People say that rock and roll started in the church, and that's really what they're talking about. They're talking about the style of music, which was up-tempo and had a emphasis on the beat, the 2 and the 4. And it migrated into popular music, into jazz, old-time music, becoming Western swing music, and of course into gospel music in the 20s and 30s. And so when I hear that Pentecostal strain in gospel music, that's usually what I'm looking for. The other thing is the church is a great place for visionaries and self-appointed prophets and people of the like to shout and to say their message, their syncretic message. So I'm looking for that too.
Yeah, and I mean, what else about it is in the there's also in that kind of Pentecostal music, there's an amount of repetition that seems heavily that has become what all popular music is these days.
Well, I think that's so the people can sing up.
Yeah.
In the early part of the 20th century, a lot of people couldn't read, and also, for example, a preacher would take a part of his text and ad lib from his text, and the congregation would pick up on it, and they would just repeat, chant what he had picked out of the sermon. So it was a way for people to worship and communicate and have a dialogue with the pastor and with themselves. And if it was simple, a phrase and a couple of words, then everybody could join in.
Yeah. And so what do you, there's a certain in most of the music that you play, there's is it an emotion that you're looking for, or is it how interested are you in things that sound weird, or
it's I mean, it's kind of like, in a way, like outsider art. It's the same sort of attraction. And it brings up another question. I'm always aware of my position sort of as a free-form curator, and if you will, and sort of canvassing over this African-American musical and cultural phenomena and picking out things and presenting it a certain way. And in the sense that I'm always asking myself, is this exploiting, is it am I trying to show something that I really have a feel for? Is it honest? Those kind of questions too kind of arise from that. But having said that, I mean, if it rocks, that's what I'm looking for. If it rocks, and if it has a certain rawness and vitality to it, gospel music, really starting in the mid-'60s, really wasn't recorded very well. People didn't put the best studios. They had little mom and pop studios. And the music has this sort of quirky, oddness to it. Some of it is just plain bad.
Yeah.
But then some of it though becomes very, very interesting in its badness. And the way it was chorded, the bass is way too loud. The drums are in the mix funny, but the music something works. So those recordings. In the late 60s and the 70s and on into the 80s, that have this sort of a real raw sort of power to it, not only in the music itself, but the way it's recorded.
Yeah, do you, should we maybe listen to a little bit of something? Do you have something that might fit that bill?
Yeah. This is I have a recording right here by the Abraham Brothers, who were a local regional act in South Carolina in the late 50s and the 60s. They recorded some records for some small mom and pop record labels in these clunky little studios. And if you can get by, the initial feeling of this is a muddy, bad recording and really start tuning in on the music. I guess play about a minute and a half of this?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Is that?
Yeah.
So there's a spirit of the Lord in this place, and it's probably appropriate.
Right.
improvising band section in a church, if the congregation is responding well, that section could go on for 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah. So you were talking about wondering whether you were being exploitative, or sometimes worrying about that. Is that how? I mean, it seems like it must not be. You must be able to convince yourself pretty easily that that's not really the case. Or do you worry about that? Are you accused of that ever?
No, I don't think I've been ever accused. I've gotten some inquiry emails from the listeners asking about why I play excerpts. One of the features of the show is I play excerpts from AM gospel radio commercials that I recorded during the 1980s and part of the 90s in Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. And people wonder about what are the point of playing these commercials? Because the ones that I'm really drawn to are just, the zany, crazy, over-the-top kind of representations from these spiritualist voodoo readers.
Yeah.
Or, someone that might have a sort of unique way with words or with grammar. And those are probably the items that give me the most pause. So,
they are, they're very wonderful and funny. So they're all recorded in the 80s and early 90s. So you've stopped recording those.
Yeah, every once in a while I'll hear, AM radio, gospel on AM radio is pretty much dried up. There are some stations that I've come across that still. Basically what it is there's one station here in Montgomery still that does paid. Anybody can go in on Saturday during the day that this radio station is on the air, and you can buy airtime, and you get in front of the microphone and you just sing or say anything you want to. And when the community has this opportunity to go in, you have self-appointed visionaries and hucksters and people like that'll stand in front of the microphone for their 15 or 30-minute program, such as it is, and read from the Bible and shout, carry on, and preach, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, let's listen to one of those if you have it to maybe the what is it, the spiritual workshop, gentlemen.
Yeah, you know what? I was sitting here looking. You're talking about Reverend Isaiah Espy, and you hear on gospel radio stations in the South. Even today, you'll hear commercials for palm readers and spiritualists. And back in the 80s, a lot of these folk did their own commercials. Or like Reverend Espy, he would. He bought his own airtime, and he had a hoodoo shop of roots and charms that would sell, and he would push these over the AM radio. And these wonderful commercials. But you know what, Andrew? I'm sitting here looking. I thought I had one lined up, and it doesn't look like I do.
No problem.
But what I do have is.
And it sounds to us maybe crazy that anyone would buy this kind of stuff, but really this is stuff that is, there's a giant history of Catholic Church selling relics, and I think preachers at all times have sold. Prayer cloths that have holy water on them, or oils, or
and Jesus night lights, kind of curios. A selection I actually have. We're talking about preachers. Is one of these some of these spiritualists are also pastors of churches, and they have their own. I know it's a thing that you're interested in with the Jimmy Swaggart thing. Is just the whole the oration, if you will, of their rhetoric and their style and the chant and the singing that they do. And there was a preacher here in Montgomery that I recorded off the radio back in the 1980s, Elder Billy Hall, a holiness preacher, and he would buy 30 minutes of airtime and preach on the air every Saturday afternoon on WMGY radio station in Montgomery. And this is part of a sermon. He has a really unique style, but it's not an African American tradition. It's very the chanting style. And if you hear people that where it sounds like they're trying to cough up something out of their throat, that style's called whooping. Yeah. But Billy Hall doesn't whoop, but he had. Go ahead.
That is something that Jimmy Swaggart does, and now we haven't really specifically mentioned this, so I'll go ahead and say that I'm doing a show called Get Mad and Sin, which is a reincarnation of a sermon by Jimmy Swaggart, as preached at the First Assembly of God in Van Buren, Arkansas, circa 1971. And it's a record that I found that he released on his own record label. And what I'm doing is trying to recreate with perfect audio fidelity the sound of the record live on stage, and then trying to figure out what to do with my body while doing that. And he does the whooping, the huh at the end of every line, and a lot of lines. And so it sounds like we're going to hear a little bit of this, but it's hard to do, and I'd love to hear if you know more about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Where does because the white preachers do it and the black preachers do it, and it's really only recently that people started calling it whooping. That it was just people did it. They didn't think there was a name for it. And I don't know if you look at like the academic literature for this type of thing. I mean, we know how important that African American oration is in our history and the contribution to literature, but there's very little actually written on it. And there's a couple of books and some more articles, but there's no recordings, and there's really not much to turn to. But let's see. This is Elder Billy Hall with part of a sermon called "Jezebel is a Spirit."
Just wait God knows you're gonna feel the breath. Yeah. You're gonna feel the spirit. Come on right now. Lay your hands on the radio. Right now.
And that was the last thing, that was Reverend Isaiah.
You found it.
And right before that, yeah, that did find it. And that was Billy Hall that started it off.
Yeah, we had a hard time making out many of the words on that first one, but it almost allows you to appreciate the musicality of it more.
Yeah, and it's there's whistlings and background. A lot of the audio
issues here.
Kevin, I don't know if you can you hear me right now?
Sure.
Oh yeah, okay, maybe this is working now. You were saying there was some hissing and whistling on the AM radio stations.
Yeah, the Billy Hall report. They don't really, there's no engineer. They put you in front of the microphone. The radio station goes on. Just keep talking. So some of these recordings.
Yeah. And the...
Okay.
No, please.
I like it that way.
We're breaking up a little bit here, Kevin.
Okay, how about now?
That sounds good so far.
Okay.
Where were we?
Well, I'd love to sort of start shifting again a little bit more towards Jimmy Swaggart, if you could. And what sort of attracted you to this material?
Yeah. So this was a record that I found in a thrift store, and I was trying to learn how to DJ, or how to be a turntablist to scratch records, and I never got any good at it. Partially because I didn't realize the difference between belt-driven turntables and modern turntables, so you can't scratch on your mom's old record player. But I went to a lot of thrift stores trying to find weird sounds on records, and I found at a thrift store two Jimmy Swaggart albums that he recorded, and really the albums are not much different than the prayer cloths or magical oils or anything like that. He produced it as something to sell at his, when he would come to town to do a revival, he would preach, and he would have a merch table, basically. He would sell his other sermons. And so we would, me and some friends of mine were just, again, the sound of his voice was so insane and so intense. And then he also was saying lots of things that to us were very funny about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So it was really easy to make each other laugh by scratching the sound of him talking about taking pills or that kind of thing. And so that really is what initially attracted me about it. And then years later, I became a theater maker and stopped being interested in plays and became interested in making, it's what everybody calls devised theater, which is just theater that doesn't start with a playwright, but starts with something else, and trying to find things with which to make shows that is not a play. And so I thought back to this sermon that I still had on the record, and wondered whether it could make a good show, and was attracted to the many layers of drama that are in this documentary source. So it's not meant to be dramatic, although he is very dramatic as a orator. But he has a narrative within his, or a couple different narratives, and he has an artistic structure. And then there's also a dramatic tension between of me coming on stage and saying really offensive things to my audience, what I assume is offensive things. He starts the sermon off with reading from Romans, talking about homosexuals need to die, basically. And that's how he starts his sermon. And he's not even talking about that in the sermon, but he's like, I just want to get this out of the way. Homosexuals need to die, and then let's talk about some other stuff. And I thought that would be a really interesting way to interact with a New York audience. And then there's a tension, I think, that the audience feels between me addressing them, and is seemingly in a present tense, but there's also it's a historical document. So those are some of the things that attract me. Yeah. And I see myself. We are here talking our three curators, because I also curate this performance series called Catch with Jeff Larson, who is also my director on Get Mad and Sin. And I make my own shows and I perform in other people's shows. And I, at one point, was like, well, what is it that I do? Or like, if I have to define it, and what it is that I'm trying to share things that I like with other people in all of those kind of aspects. And that's something that, Rod, you obviously do with the Fusebox Festival, and Kevin, that you're doing with Sinners Crossroads, and we should also mention that Kevin does, did we talk about this at all, Case Quarter?
No.
Well, there's this awesome, I have one of them here. Oh, where is it? Here it is. This is, we'll show the audience here live. I got two wings. This is a CD and accompanying book, or book and accompanying CD of some Church of God in Christ performers, mostly Elder Utah Smith. And I feel like I'm rambling here a little bit. Maybe we should take questions if there are any. Yes?
Yeah, I got a question. What do you think was the secret to Jimmy Swaggart's enormous popularity? Why was he so, well, like, I always get the feeling that a lot of people who were watching him on TV weren't necessarily people who agreed with him, but they somehow were attracted to him on some other level. What do you think that level was?
Yeah. Kevin, just so you probably didn't hear that, did you, Kevin?
I didn't know.
Just so you're not left out of the conversation, the question is, what was the secret to Jimmy Swaggart's popularity, and was it all that, were all of his audience agreeing with him? And at first, his first secret to popularity was Jerry Lee Lewis. And Jerry Lee Lewis they were first cousins. And and they really had a kind of seesaw popularity relationship where one was up when the other was down.
Were they, or are they friends?
Are they friends? I don't know. But there's certainly been a lot of very direct tension. Jerry Lee Lewis was also a preacher before he got into rock and roll. And they both were young hoodlums and in church all the time. And Jimmy Swaggart had some revelations come to him. He made some predictions, 10 predictions when he was 8 years old. the 10th of which has never been revealed. But so anyway, when he started preaching, Jerry Lee Lewis was very famous, and he started preaching, and I feel like he really started doing that. When Jerry Lee first got famous, Jimmy was digging ditches for a living, and I think that he really started pushing to be a preacher in opposition to Jerry Lee.
Yeah.
But he would put Jerry Lee's name on his posters bigger than his own name. So it would say, you know, come see Jimmy Swaggart, first cousin of Jerry Lee Lewis. But then he obviously had his own tremendous success. He's the best-selling gospel artist of all time. Kevin, what do you think about that? That's his own figure, 15 million records.
Jimmy?
Yeah.
He plays piano just like Jerry Lee Lewis too. So he's very popular with African American community too. You see Jimmy Swaggart records in a lot of thrift stores in African American neighborhoods.
You must come across them all the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever pick them up, or do you pass them by in the bin?
I don't know when a Jimmy Swaggart record.
But I think what is really one thing that's attractive about him is that he is. I mean, it's just like Kevin was saying in the music. He's raw and he's emotional and he's sexy. Yeah. He's very sexual and smooth and dirty in his preaching, and he goes nuts. I mean, he cannot keep himself in control. I think there's a little bit of probably all the time that you watched him, a little bit of train wreck. I mean, he cried very easily and was crying all the time, and saying really inappropriate things, violent things. I mean, yeah.
Danger. There was a sense of danger.
Yeah.
Not necessarily physical danger, but
yeah, or maybe even physical danger. Yeah. I feel like that's one of my challenges in doing this show is that he has he's got a foot on me, and I feel like I could do it better if I was bigger.
But would you agree that a good portion of his popularity and people who watched him were people who did not agree with him on these issues?
He was what do you call it? It's a follow-up question. What do they call that in entertainment media when someone's not sticking to the question? And they is his audience, do they believe what he's saying? I don't know. I mean, I think probably yes, that there was a lot of people who would watch him whether they believed or not. I certainly do not agree with what he says. Or I agree with like none of the specifics of what he says. Although I might agree with some of his broader points. But to get there, I'd have to broaden them to a point where he may not even recognize his point.
Yeah.
Could I say something?
Please.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt. I mean, they believe Jimmy Swaggart is part of that white Southern Pentecostal evangelical tradition, and there are millions and millions of people that believe every word that Jimmy Swaggart says. I mean, he's not an anomaly. I mean, he represents a theology and a political philosophy that has been, a part of the Southern and American sort of belief system for, I don't know, at least it's middle part of the 1800s. He's, I mean, if Fox News had a chapel hour on Sunday morning, Jimmy Swaggart would be the preacher. They believe everything he says, no doubt. That's why he's so popular.
I mean, certainly there may be some people who watch him without believing, but he was, I think at the height of his popularity, when he was on he was available on half of the televisions in the world.
What period was this? Mid-1980s?
Yeah, 80s, mid-80s. And he was getting, his ministry was getting checks. The average check was like $45 or something. $500,000 a day.
Wow.
So those people believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think now his audience is a fraction of what it once was. Ever since the fall in 1988, the audience is fraction.
Yeah, so
I would say now he's only watched by people who believe in it. But I have to suspect that a good portion of his popularity at the time, before the fall, were people who didn't even agree with him, just like the theatricality.
Yeah, maybe so. Kevin, do you mind if I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Do you believe in God? You don't have to answer that if you don't want to. This is going to be podcast on and available on the internet forever.
For the foreseeable future.
I was just thinking about that again yesterday, and I think I decided that if there is a God, he's a very tiny God. He's a very meek God. He's not at all what people view whatever he is. If he's an entity that he's part of he's removed from this creation in some way, and he needs believers because he actually lacks the power to actually do all the good that he wants to do. So I was thinking to myself that that's a definition of outlook that I could believe in, or I could grasp. But if I'd have to, I'm definitely a reluctant agnostic, and I've got to see a miracle
Yeah.
before I become a believer.
Yeah.
When it gets down to.
But you are a regular churchgoer.
That's true.
And is that because of your wife, or is that because you go for the music, or?
I mean, it's where the party's at. You gotta go. You gotta get. That's you go to church for two reasons. You go to church to worship and to fellowship with other people, and it's just especially in Alabama. There's just a lot of churches, and I try to go to different churches every couple of weeks. So it's just interesting to me the different ways that people worship, and then most people usually most churchgoers are nice people. I've never gotten in a gunfight at church.
Yeah, there's another question.
Just about I'm assuming the performance is pretty wild from what I've heard. I'm curious about your strategies about cultivating or entering these extreme emotions. And if you ever get on a line, did you actually enter that vulnerable phase of just coming out
Yeah. So the question, Kevin, was that he imagined the performance, the show, Kid Mad at Sin, to be pretty wild, and what my strategy was in relation to the emotion that is captured on the record, and bring that to a performance. And I, as a actor, I try not to, I'm not interested in pretending or trying to create emotions, just in the kind of performing that I like to do and stuff like that. But I frequently find, but one thing is that preaching makes me emotional. I listen to preaching. I like, from this record, I have gotten into preachers, and I will, find new preachers. There's a great preacher who I love named T.D. Jakes, who is out now. Kevin, do you know T.D.?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, and that will make me. I don't believe in God myself, but I went to church when I was a kid, and maybe that's part of it. But all that stuff still makes me emotional. So for one thing, I'm just saying something that sometimes makes me emotional, and then I am, although not trying to create the emotion within me, I'm trying to replicate what his voice sounds like, and screaming in an aggressive way can make me feel aggressive, and trying to, like, making the kind of crying voice sound like that sound when you sound like you're about to start crying. Sometimes that will do it to me. I try, and then the instinct that kind of is like, oh, this is good. So I try not to hold on to that when it does start to come up, and just continue to try to sound like him while communicating honestly where I am with the audiences there.
So it's sort of task-driven in that sense.
Yeah, it's very...
Thinking about the actual sound replication as opposed to the emotional content.
Right.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question sort of along those lines. So you worked really hard for this presentation. Do you feel like that's what Swigert is doing as well? Do you feel like he's genuine in what he's presenting, or that he's disingenuous, that he's presenting this thing to demonstrate the sort of Pentecostal, filled with the Holy Spirit ideal for his audience? Just from all the listening to them.
Yeah, so Kevin, the question is do we think that Jimmy Swaggart is a true believer, or do we think that he is a perhaps cynical?
That's actually not my question. Is about his actual presentation. Do you feel like when he's preaching that he's really saying, regardless of what he believes, in those moments, is he really digging into the thing you're talking about, where he's almost crying, or the tears, or do you feel like he's putting that on as a presentation? I feel like he can still be a true believer, but also
in terms of his personal emotion, is he really going through his Is he really having those emotions, or is he manufacturing those emotions as part of his stage act?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it like James Brown,
right,
collapsing? Kevin, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I think just listening to the last answer that you had, where you were talking about what you had to be conscious of while you were doing the sermon yourself. I think that's, I haven't seen, unfortunately, your performance, but I've read about it and I've thought about it, and then listening to you talk about it, I think it's really a a productive and unique sort of endeavor, and and for me, it's paying dividends already just thinking about it, because I really think some of the decisions that you have to make yourself in presenting your performance is the same thing that Jimmy Swaggart goes through. The preachers like Jimmy Swaggart go through. And when I was a kid growing up and listening to different preachers, I kind of thought the same thing, because I would see people that would, people in church that would, I knew they were saying things that they themselves didn't believe in, and it made me uncomfortable. You know, because you're talking at the same time, everything is being grounded in this absolute ethical system. And so, you know, your comments, and I think the performance of what you do, I think, I'm very, very interested in it, and the questions that people have asked about that. I think it's really going in a fruitful direction, because it is it. I mean, what part of it is performance, and what part of it does come from the heart, and then of course, does it really matter? You know, I think there's Bible verses that talk about you can be saved by someone who doesn't have a righteous heart. You know, if they're like a false preacher. So it's interesting to think about. You know, I mean, I think people that right off the bat, when people see preachers like Jimmy Swaggart, television evangelists, most people are just like, this guy's a total joke, you know. But then there are other people that are like totally buy into what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that whether it's hard to believe that he wouldn't at some point realize that maybe people are interested because he's a little bit wild or because he gets emotional, and then, you know, over the course of his career kind of realize, oh, my ratings are dropping a little bit, I better say something, you know.
Well, what about the record that you're basing your
But then in this record, I definitely believe that everything, because he really seems to be trying hard actually to stay calm and to stay on message, and but he just keeps working himself up and going off his script. We should probably wrap up.
Yeah. Could you just talk for a minute about his fall?
Oh yeah, so we want to hear about the fall a little bit. So Jimmy Swaggart was, I believe that he probably wanted this to happen, but he got busted a couple of times with prostitutes. The first time he was caught by a rival preacher, Marvin Gorman, whose career he had kind of destroyed. He had busted. It was like all these private eyes, and I think he had gotten private eyes too. And he had busted Marvin Gorman in some kind of adultery with one of Marvin Gorman's congregants. And then Marvin Gorman busted him coming out of a motel with a prostitute. And the motel that he was at, and that he apparently went to regularly, there was about half a mile on one side to Marvin Gorman's church, half a mile on the other side to the sheriff's office. And that's where he would cruise for prostitutes. And then a couple years later, he got busted in a car. He had picked up a prostitute and he got pulled over.
What year was this?
That was the first time, I think, was '88,
Yeah.
and I don't remember when the second time was. He was defrocked by his church, or he was given, I think, a 3-year moratorium where he was not allowed to preach, or it may have just been a year, but he was not allowed to preach for some amount of time, and he couldn't resist. He just started preaching, and so he's no longer with the Assembly of God Church. He's a non-denominational, and it definitely had a big effect on his career, or on his ministry. It's a lot smaller now than it was then. but he is still preaching, as is his son and his grandson. And it's jsm.org, I think, Jimmy Swaggart Ministries, or .com. If you want to check out his current work.
Wonderful.
And you should all podcast Sinners Crossroads, which is available on wfmu.org or through iTunes, Sinners Crossroads. It's a really consistently excellent radio show that you will enjoy every week.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.